I'm really happy to be here. This is my first Hackers Congress, so it's really been fun so far, and I'm looking forward to seeing other talks and whatnot, and engaging with the community. So yeah, I've been involved in the space for since about 2013 or late 2012. I organized San Francisco Bitcoin Meetups for a couple of years. Before that, I was actually still interested in decentralized technology, but I didn't really know about Bitcoin yet. It was more in the realm of mesh networking and peer-to-peer internet connectivity. So I'm interested in all of the decentralized things. So if you want to talk about any of that with me, I'm super willing and open. And yeah, I do community for Zcash. So I try to grow the community, both users and developers. So we have a pretty quickly growing ecosystem of people that are integrating Zcash into their wallets and creating new services based on Zcash. So it's really exciting. And yeah, we've only been around for a year now. And it's been growing quickly, I think, along with a bunch of the other cryptocurrencies due to many factors. But it's been a really exciting year so far. So I'm going to talk about what internet money is. So I want to first start off not thinking about cryptocurrencies, but just imagining what internet, the ideal internet money would be, money that's based on the internet. So you think of something, properties being secure, so the network itself being secure, the endpoints or the client side software being secure, people being able to control what people do and don't see. Accessible, so accessible wherever the internet exists. And things that are separate from the internet that you still want with money are fungibility. Is fungibility, so the property of having any one unit in the system be equal to any one other single unit in the system, regardless of its history or your ability to identify that unit. And privacy, so just the basic concept of being able to protect your data and not revealing that information to anyone that you don't necessarily want to or needs to see it. So I think, obviously Bitcoin being the first cryptocurrency, it has a few of these properties, but it's also lacking a few of these properties. Namely, it's secure and accessible. So the network is pretty secure. There's a bunch of nodes. It's been around for, it's coming up on a decade. So it's got quite a strong network. There's plenty of people running nodes. There's plenty of miners keeping it secure. And then there's also plenty of services and wallets that are secure, so people can control their own money. They can secure it the way they like, or they can potentially trust a third-party service that is keeping their money secure for them. A lot of those third-party services aren't necessarily secure, but there are some that have really good practices. So people have the ability to choose between managing their own money or using sort of a bank-type, Coinbase-type service to, if they don't trust themselves, to protect their money. And it's also accessible, so anywhere the internet is accessible, you can use Bitcoin, so that's great. But some things that it doesn't have are the property I mentioned of fungibility and privacy, and those are linked together because if you can distinguish any one unit, if you can distinguish one unit of Bitcoin from another unit of Bitcoin based on its history, then that presents two problems. A, the fact that you can say that any person, service can say, I'm not going to accept that Bitcoin, but I'll accept that Bitcoin. That's a problem. And then also just the general property of transaction linkability. So there are companies, several companies at this point, that make money based off of analysis of the Bitcoin blockchain. And they're expanding to other cryptocurrencies as well. And they sell that data. They don't just like keep it for themselves. They sell it to all types of groups, namely law enforcement. And you know, regardless of what you think of that practice, it's a problem for, you know, general financial freedom. Having a third party be able to view your transactions, and potentially, if you make one single mistake and link your identity to a Bitcoin address, or, you know, any other cryptocurrency that doesn't have privacy integrated, that can be devastating because it's a blockchain and it's there forever. So those are two problems, and then, you know, that linkability problem is becoming more and more of a problem. I probably don't have to go into it too deeply, but, you know, being able to send money from my account to someone else's account without having to consider my history, where I got that money, what that person is going to do with that money, and all of the potential problems that might arise. So some solutions that specifically Bitcoin core people and people that are really heavily invested in Bitcoin are looking at are a lot of layer 2 solutions, so like building on top of Bitcoin to provide more privacy, and there are some solutions that are more considering like adding into the core, but we all know that the development of Bitcoin is a slower process. And that's not to say it's a bad thing. It's like a conservative method of doing something. Whereas, you know, you might compare that with Ethereum development, which is extremely progressive, and they do a bunch of things all the time. And, you know, they're even like looking to integrate the privacy that Zcash uses into their blockchain, you know, relatively soon. They're already like starting to test it and whatnot. So if you're like super into Bitcoin and that's like your currency, then you're probably not going to see like the core support for privacy in the near future. It'll probably be dependent on these layer 2 solutions. So that's basically why Zcash came to be. Brief history of Zcash is scientists, including Matthew Green, developed this protocol called Zero Coin, and they were super excited about it. That's like an older implementation of what then turned into Zero Cash, and then the Zcash Company took that concept and improved on it a little bit more and turned it into Zcash. But originally, Matthew Green and other scientists pitched this zero coin concept to the Bitcoin core developers, and they were like, let's add privacy, let's do it. And, you know, pretty, like, it didn't make sense at that point to add zero coin into Bitcoin, A, because it was like extremely inefficient, and B, because it's like this whole new thing. What we generally see now with the development process of Bitcoin, they're not jumping to add new things in extremely quickly. So the answer was to just take this technology and create a new cryptocurrency. So that's what happened with Zcash. So now I'll talk more about Zcash and what it means to be internet money. So Zcash is like trying to be this internet money protocol, which has all of the great things that Bitcoin has, plus the privacy and fungibility. So as mentioned, we're approaching the first year anniversary on October 28th. So I hope everyone here has a fun Zcash birthday party or something. And what we're really able to do with this technology is combine the properties of Bitcoin the properties of blockchains and the properties of encryption. So if you consider encrypting the transaction data on Bitcoin, just adding encryption as it is on a blockchain, you can't really verify, the nodes in the network can't necessarily verify anything that's going into the transaction, which is necessary for the security and for not double spending and whatnot. So what zero-knowledge proofs do in Zcash is allow for the encryption of the transaction data, but also allow the nodes in the network to still verify that the owner of the tokens actually owns it, they haven't spent it before, and that they're sending it to a legitimate address, and but it's still all private between the sender and receiver. Another really cool property of encryption is that you might not necessarily think of, you don't really think about it as like a cool property until you consider what you can do with something like Zcash. But being able to encrypt a transaction, and yes, it's only visible by the sender and receiver, but you can also, with any other thing that you encrypt, share that key to access it to anyone else. So you can share it with a third party, but you don't have to share it with the entirety of the world via a public transaction. So, that's very useful for many of situations, and we're finding more and more use cases for that every day. But to talk about the properties of Zcash, so we use ZK snarks, which, if you're not aware, zero knowledge, succinct, non-interactive arguments of knowledge. And we're able to use this property of generating zero knowledge proofs to encrypt the data using shielded addresses. So anytime you send or receive a Zcash coin from a shielded address, the blockchain does not record the input or how much was received, nor if you send from it, how much was sent out. The change is, because it's a private address and nothing is revealed, we don't have to worry about this whole concept of creating a new address and sending change to a new address to attempt to obfuscate the money a little bit. In practice, that's it's a good attempt, and it makes it a little more complex to analyze the blockchain, but it's still linkable. So we can, because we don't have to worry about that, we can just send the change back to the original address, and it makes things a lot easier. You don't have to manage millions of addresses if you don't want to. The transaction fee is still visible right now as the current implementation goes. But we also, for now, have this concept of transparent addresses, and those are essentially like Bitcoin addresses. Everything received and sent is visible on the blockchain, and we get a lot of criticism about it, but it's actually been extremely useful for us to get the network out there and get third-party services to be able to integrate it right off the bat. So you can consider that, even though you're using a transparent address, if you were to send some Zcash from a shielded address, you're still kind of breaking that linkability from its previous history. So most transparent transactions still don't have the same risk of linkability that totally public blockchain transactions have. So you can send and receive between these two types of addresses. And because it's so similar to Bitcoin, I mentioned that it's really easy for third-party services to just integrate this part and then worry about that step later. We actually call that layer 1 and layer 2, or level 1, level 2 integration. And another reason why we have transparent addresses still is because the current implementation of Zcash requires 3 gigs of RAM and about 37 seconds of generating the zero-knowledge proof, which basically means no mobile devices and a pretty like a mediocre computer. On my laptop, it's closer to a minute of generating the zero knowledge proof. So it's not like, it's really not that useful yet. The goal, however, is to improve the cryptography, and that is our plan for what we're calling the version 2, which is sapling. We recently released some benchmarks of the improved cryptography that our scientists have been working on. I should mention that our scientists are the same ones that developed Zero Coin and Zero Cash. We call them the 7 scientists, but we're really lucky to have them continuing to innovate and research ways to improve the cryptography in Zcash. But sapling will allow us to reduce the RAM usage to 40 megabytes. That's 98%, something like that, reduction in memory usage, and down to 7 seconds. So that means when sapling's introduced, we can kind of what's the point of transparent addresses? And we haven't really committed to it yet, but we have definitely publicly said that hopefully one day we can get rid of transparent addresses and just use totally shielded addresses. And that's actually one thing I want to mention. And I'm totally about building bridges, actually. The whole schism and all in the cryptocurrency community is really stressful to me. So I just want, in that vein, I want to give a shout out to Monero for having this default privacy. And we totally respect that, and that's our goal. We want to get there, but we use a different mechanism for providing privacy in the blockchain. So this is our method. It's not super efficient yet. We want to get there, and so there you go. And so yeah, faster ZK snarks. That's our goal. I don't have a date. We basically said 2018 is our goal for releasing sapling. Nothing more specific than that, though. And it's really cool. That will allow us to kind of shift the anonymity set to be much larger. So right now, we have a default anonymity set, which so an anonymity set, I should mention, is basically how big the pool of transactions how big the pool is that your transaction could be any one of. So in Zcash, it's basically all of the shielded addresses could be any one of the could be involved with any of the transactions. So the anonymity set is relative to how many shielded addresses are in use in Zcash. So right now, we're probably closer to this image where there's this anonymity set, but there's all these transparent transactions happening on the outside, some of them going in and then coming back out. There are some issues with linkability in that situation too, because, for example, if you were to send, I forget which one it is, but if you send 10 Zcash to a shielded address, and then in the next block send 9.9999 Zcash to back out to a transparent address, even though it's not explicitly linkable, you can still kind of assume that they're probably related. So if you are going to be using shielded addresses to sort of break the linkability, for example, between doing a mobile transaction. If you want to use Zcash, you can use Zcash, but it's not going to be shielded. But if you want to try to break that linkability, you should consider, once you send to a shielded address, maybe splitting the values up once you send back to a transparent address, and maybe waiting longer so it's not immediate. So there are methods to obfuscate it, and we wrote a blog post about it that kind of goes into more detail. But we want to be closer to this, and that will definitely help with the sapling upgrade. And then hopefully, it'll just be that one day. That's what I really hope for, because that kind of emulates the properties of cash as they are. At least in most countries. And so that's really important for, you know, just protecting individual freedom, human dignity, and just general business practices. So yeah, now I'm going to talk about some like use cases. Does anyone know who Barrett Brown is? He was a hacker or a journalist, hacker journalist that basically shared a link and that it got him put in jail in the US. And there has been a legal defense fund to help support his legal costs. And I think it was last year, the FBI served a subpoena to the company, I think it was like WePay or something, but they basically wanted to know the supporters of Barrett Brown, and so they served a subpoena to WePay and asked for all of the the donors' identities, and they got it because it's a subpoena. And as a result, the people who manage the legal funds for Barrett Brown and other kind of truth tellers is called Courage Foundation. You might know them. They also do defense funds for Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning and probably like 7 others. But they decided to add Zcash as an option. They already had Bitcoin as an option, but as I have previously said, that's not necessarily the best for protecting the privacy of the users. So they decided to add Zcash as their second cryptocurrency acceptable for donations. WikiLeaks also recently added Zcash donations. I think they were Bitcoin and Litecoin were the first 2 that they started accepting, but in a similar vein of just being able to protect the privacy of their users, or sorry, their supporters. And then Venezuela is like a really hot topic right now. We're actually like really interested in this situation because there just have been reports of people using Zcash there. We aren't like necessarily like doing anything specific other than just like, I guess the Zcash Foundation wrote a guide for Venezuelans if they want to like start using Zcash, but being able to use Zcash and even any other cryptocurrency is really useful for people in Venezuela, where I assume everyone knows, but they've reached, I think actually like 2 weeks ago it was announced that 1 Venezuelan bolivar equals 1 Satoshi. So they've had 2,000%, upwards of 2,000% inflation in the past few years. Providing like a really good example of why you don't want currencies controlled by a central group of people, because this can happen anywhere. So yes, internet money for social good. You can use internet money. Any individuals can use internet money and benefit from it, just like cash, just like the internet. But also, on the flip side, internet money for enterprise and government. Like, I'm probably presenting an extremely controversial point of view right now because of where we are, but maybe one of the methods is introducing like the usefulness of these tools to the people that are, at least for now, making the rules. But as companies and enterprises, you don't, like if you're using Bitcoin, you probably have an issue with competitors being able to analyze or watch. If they're able to link your addresses to your company, then there's potential for your competitors to see your transactions, to watch your supply chain, and it's just not that good for business. Also, with large transactions, maybe banks actually don't like Bitcoin because it's transparent, and I'm not a fan of banks, but maybe and even like banks are like, they are what they are, but they do provide that, like, at least for now, the kind of on-ramp for a lot of people potentially to get into cryptocurrencies. So you could like even look at Coinbase as a bank. they are what they are, but if people can like just get Zcash or Bitcoin or whatever easy, then that might just be like a tool that we need for now. And maybe you disagree with me, but that's at least one approach that I think should be like acceptable. I don't necessarily see a downside of it. Whether you want to support that or put effort towards it, like whatever. But that's one of the things that is good for private money, and internet money can be good for these situations as well. And that's one of the, I should also say, yeah, large donors. Actually, the Internet Archive is, they store, they do a bunch of things, but they're mainly known for storing the history of websites in servers. And they actually, a lot of their donations are based off of large donors. And other foundations are based off of large donors as well. But there's a really good point in that, like, a lot of people don't want to give a lot of money because the foundation will be like, oh, can I have more? Like, they'll basically keep going back to them. So there's a lot of just like general not weariness about doing large donations to foundations because you don't know if they're going to keep bugging you or whatnot. So that's a use case as well. So the selective disclosure I was mentioning in the beginning, basically the usefulness of encryption, being able to give a third party a key to decrypt that transaction that's not the sender or receiver. That's actually a really good tool for enterprise and governments to like kind of come around and see the usefulness of this. So being able to, if you file your taxes or whatnot, say, oh, I made this shielded transaction. Here's the key. You can just view just that transaction. You can't view the rest of my history. Or maybe you want to share a transaction with some other people in your company, but you don't want to share it with the rest, like everyone else in the company. So there's a lot of potential for being able to encrypt data, transaction data, but have a key that if you want to share it with third parties, you can. Cool. So actually, in conclusion, good timing. So I think internet money is useful for everyone, and we should kind of be welcoming to that and not necessarily like pushing back against use cases. Providing easy on-ramps to cryptocurrencies is very useful. Whether or not you use those services, it's up to you, but other people might find them extremely useful. And even with like enterprises and governments potentially using cryptocurrencies, the open source nature and the fact that you're not, the fact that they can't control it is really important. So they're using it. It's kind of, it's kind of like the internet. They use it, but they can't necessarily control it. I mean, totally. And yeah, and just being able to provide this like foundation of privacy, accessibility, security, fungibility for everyone. Again, kind of like building bridges here. But I think I want to actually end with a trolling slide, and this is just for fun. So I know there's a lot of Bitcoin-focused people here, so forgive me. But Bitcoin, Twitter for your debit card. All your spending sent to that creepy ex-boyfriend, your business competitors, and everyone. But yeah, so I guess, yeah, that's the end. There's plenty of resources. Obviously, Zcash is open source, and we do actually do a lot of our development processes are open as well. So I personally write weekly developer updates to keep the community up to date with things we've worked on in the past week, and we engage with the community pretty heavily. We do most of our discussions. I forgot to put the link up here, but it's chat.zcashcommunity.com, and we do most of our discussions in these channels, even just with each other. So yeah, I think that's the end. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for our talk. We still have enough time to discuss, so you can prepare questions. And I would like to start with first, Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash?
I haven't installed a Bitcoin Cash wallet yet, so I guess Bitcoin. And like you guys here don't accept Bitcoin Cash, so I don't know. I don't really have an opinion.
It was just a funny question.
I'm about building bridges.
But a serious question is, you made a lot of progress in integrating to hardware wallets like Trezor Ledger.
Yeah.
You cooperate with Jax and a lot of other services, but you still don't have your own mobile wallet. What are the obstacles you solve, and is it on your milestone plan?
So we're actually potentially considering it, but so far we've actually decided we don't want to do UI, like user interface work at all, because we want to focus on the infrastructure, and we already have plenty of people integrating Zcash into their wallets. And you mentioned that like Jax and Trezor and all of them support Zcash. That, you know why? Because transparent addresses are very easy to integrate. Trezor, for example, cannot support a shielded address until sapling is released because of the. Actually, I should caveat that with we're working on a feature that is called payment offloading, and this concept is where you can offload the zero-knowledge computation onto a third-party server, whether that be a server that you own or like a computer that you own, or maybe a third-party service would support that as well. So you'd basically be able to like send the data needed to generate the zero-knowledge proof to a computer that can handle those resources. That has the resources to do it, and then it sends the proof back to your original clients. They can't spend it for you, but they do. It is a trusted situation where they would be able to view the transaction data. So, but they wouldn't be able to spend it. So.
Thank you. So there is a question from.
No.
Do you have a negative feedback from the government? Like for example, they visit you and they say like, we don't like what you do. We watch you.
No,
stuff like
actually, we don't. I think it's because we're like open to talking to them, and we've even gone to talk to them ourselves without like, I don't know. There also haven't been any like serious use cases of Zcash, like explicit use cases of Zcash for criminal activity. So they don't really have a reason. Like we get the question quite.
They don't know yet, huh?
Sorry?
They don't know yet about your
they're learning. Like there have been some reports about cryptocurrencies that include Zcash, but most of them have said Zcash is private, so there's potential for it to be used by criminals, but we don't have any actual examples yet. So I guess we're waiting, and we're willing to clear up any error if they need it.
Any plans on integrating Zcash with Lightning Network or atomic cross-chain swaps?
So we've been working on.
Pardon? Sorry.
We've been working on our own implementation of atomic swaps. Actually, we call it XCAT. It's a very basic implementation that we implemented that's Zcash to Bitcoin. You can look up we did a live demo of it on a Google Hangout probably a month ago that shows a lot. It's on the test networks, but it shows Bitcoin to Zcash atomic swap. It's on our roadmap to complete that tool, but it's kind of like up in the air to how much time we're going to focus on that at this point. We really want to get out this, make the payment offloading and the payment disclosure stuff really good so that people can start using that. And Lightning. So I don't know the status update of it, but the scientists at Zcash have started working on a protocol called Bolt, which is similar to Lightning, but it has more privacy features inside of it using zero-knowledge proofs. You can find out more about Bolt I think there's a blog post. It's like an old blog post from last year on the Zcash blog. So just look up Zcash Bolt, and you'll probably find it.
So thank you. Man in red shirt, please.
I'm sure you get this question a lot, but for me the most contentious aspect of Zcash is the trusted setup. Was it not possible to integrate zero-knowledge proofs without a trusted setup?
Correct. So a lot of people like say, why don't you use Starks, which is like this version, this implementation of zero-knowledge proofs without a trusted setup, but it's actually extremely inefficient, so it's not usable. It requires a lot of, like, way more resources to use than the current ZK Snarks implementation. It's actually, Starks actually came before Snarks because, but the scientists developed Snarks so that it would be more efficient. So there has been this existence of it, and we hope to one day be able to use it. But yes, the trusted setup is necessary for Zcash as it is now, and it'll probably be, it will be necessary for Sapling as well. However, we're imminently going to release a paper that improves on the whole process of the trusted setup. There's a lot of resources about it online, but essentially the trusted setup requires that people, a group of, or generating this private and public key. And what we did to launch Zcash was make it a multi-party computation. So it required many people to be involved. And as long as one person in that group was trustworthy and did not, and actually just destroyed their shard of the private key, we call the private key, in this case, toxic waste, because that just needed to go away and never exist. But each individual just had one single shard of this private key, so as long as one of those shards was destroyed, then the whole thing is safe. So you want the public key, which everyone generates their piece of the public key, but you don't want that private key to be put together ever. So, and there's documentation of people like burning their computers and destroying all of that. And we also just recently released an audit of the ceremony that one of the participants was a security auditing firm, and they analyzed their whole node setup and revealed that, or mentioned that they think it was a very, they mentioned that they didn't see any reason to believe that their node was compromised. So it is what it is. It's not the perfect thing, but it's required, at least for now. But hopefully one day we can also kind of move towards a setup where you don't require any trust at all.
Thanks. My favorite crypto voice from behind.
Because zero-knowledge proofs are probabilistic, does that mean that there's a tiny probability of something weird happening, like you could double spend with a very small probability? Something like that?
I'm going to say I don't know.
Oh. Okay.
Sorry. Maybe? Sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Oh, sorry if that was a noob question.
I don't, I can probably think about it and answer later, but I can't think of the answer off the top of my head.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we'll talk about it after.
Thank you.
I'm a bit confused because you said that you were planning to get rid of the transparent addresses.
Yep.
But Zuku said on Twitter that he would implement periodical checks of the supply. So he would force addresses to send it to a transparent address at certain points in time.
Yeah, so those are both kind of like ideal goals. I don't know which one we're going to end up doing. I hope we just get rid of transparent addresses. I think if we could figure out a way to audit the supply in a different way, then yes, that would be the obvious answer, is to get rid of transparent addresses. But yeah, there is, that is one reason to keep them. So.
Thank you. Or
I'm good.
If you wanted to add something.
Yeah, no.
We have a last question. Others are dedicated to premises downstairs in coffee, where you definitely can meet Paige.
Yeah, I'll be here
right?
all weekend.
So please, last question.
Hi. Can you spend a few words, please, on how you differentiate from Monero?
How
you differentiate from Monero?
How we're different?
Yeah.
Well, it's a completely different implementation. Monero.
Apart from the technical details.
How we're different apart from the technical details. So, as far as I'm aware, the Monero privacy set is based off of the number of transactions you mix together in this. Am I wrong? I'm sorry. On the basic premise, it's based off of the number of transactions that you mix together in their sets. So Zcash, Zcash is implemented such that the set is as large as there are number of shielded addresses that are in use. What other things? So yeah, Monero uses this mixing mechanism for combining a bunch of different transactions into one implementation. And there's a Monero presentation after this, or at some point this weekend, so please go see that too. I know I'll be there. But Zcash doesn't use this mixing concept at all. It just encrypts the data that is in the transaction. So it's not using this obfuscation scheme. It's more just encrypting the data. And then the more addresses that are used in Zcash, the more shielded addresses that are used in Zcash, the better privacy everyone in the network has.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think it was a terrifying start of our Congress.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. We continue. It was just the beginning.